This year, we decided to go to the heart of what this is about, and that is to look at what goes on within colleges and universities, and even more specifically, what goes on in the classroom. Who are the people who reach students? Who are the people who engage them? And that's faculty. Now, faculty are wonderful of all kinds, but we have a particular sensibility, and our sensibility was the public, and the idea that there would be people who are faculty members who consider themselves public scholars, that they take their capacity to be in a discipline, to be able to situate their lives, their energies, their productivity within the academy, and that what they produce, both in terms of the support that they give their students, but their scholarship influences everywhere, influences the world. That's a different kind of way of introducing to you the person who will speak to us now. Oscar Cásares is a faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin. He teaches English. His field is creative writing. A native of Brownsville, Texas, and a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, Professor Cásares concentrates on English, but his influence goes far beyond. He is a public scholar. That's how I discovered him. And his book, a collection of stories, Brownsville, has become a modern-day classic about the life in this border city and has been recognized by the American Library Association and included in the curriculum of several universities throughout the country. Google him and you'll see multiple books, including his most recent one. But for those of us who are here in Washington, Google him and you'll see his op-eds. You'll hear his voice in terms of the Washington Post. You'll see and hear him talk about what it means to be a Latino here in this country today. All of that is my introduction of the person who will address us now about his journey to this stage and this moment, Professor Oscar Cásares.
Hello. Buenas tardes. I'm going to be using some notes because there's a timer right here, and I've been told to keep it brief. So I'm going to attempt to do that, and I know everyone's thirsty and wants to go across the hall. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Sarita. I'm so honored to be here and hear all these stories and very incredibly inspirational. It's an honor to be asked to share some of my journey with you and how this journey has influenced my approach to teaching and reaching students. I will say that my journey is a long and winding one, so you'll excuse me if I give you the Cliff Notes version. First, you need to know how unlikely it is that I am standing before you, okay? I am not the kid who did well in school. I am not the kid who spent all his time reading. In fact, I grew up in a house with no books. And yet, somehow, growing up on the border in Brownsville, Texas, I had the sense that there was something else out there for me, and I simply hadn't found it yet. Never mind that I hadn't shown any sign of talent or initiative that would suggest that there was anything out there. I just believed it, and that was enough. I was a few months away from graduating high school. This was Christmas time, and it dawned on me, I should start applying to college. I mean, it made perfect sense to me. Everyone in this room just says that's idiotic, But to me, it was like, well, yeah, I should get that ball rolling. And so I had, my sister had a friend who was a academic advisor at the University of Pennsylvania. I didn't know anything about the University of Pennsylvania other than it was on the East Coast and that's where all the smart kids went. And I said, well, why not me? I mean, I'm smart enough. So I go and I meet with this guy, and he talks to me about the SAT, and he talks to me about personal essays, and he talks to me about public service. And without so much as saying the words, without uttering it, I understand I'm not Ivy League material, right? And it was a sobering experience, but one that I needed to hear. Instead, I ended up at my community college, Texas Southmost College. Otherwise known as Harvard on the Rio Grande. It was the best choice for me at the time. I spent 2 years there and then transferred to UT Austin, where I majored in advertising. I graduated in 1987, but it took another 2 years before I found a job at an ad agency in Austin, where I started as a copywriter and was eventually promoted to a creative director. I spent 8 years working and traveling to places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. The more I traveled, though, the more I found myself telling friends stories about the U.S.-Mexico border. This place that I had grown up, a place called Brownsville, Texas. This usually happened at a bar in Austin, in D.C., in San Francisco. At first, it seemed like just a way to pass time. But I know now it was because I missed home. And the farther I traveled, the more desperately I wanted to hold on to these memories. A lot of the stories I'd tell people were ones I grew up hearing from my tío Nico and tío Hector, who would come to my parents' house and tell the most amazing stories about our family. Stories that happened before I was born, stories that happened when they were my age, stories from when my great-great-grandfather had arrived in Texas in the mid-1800s. I'd tell a few of these stories to my friends, and then I'd say, I better shut up. I've hogged up enough of the conversation. And they'd go, no. Tell another one. We'll buy more beer. And so I'd keep telling the stories. And eventually, there was always someone who said, well, are you going to write any of these stories? Like, whoa. I'm not a writer. I'm just a storyteller. The truth is, I didn't feel entitled to be a writer. To me, a writer came with a certain background, a certain pedigree. A writer was someone who grew up with a father who after supper, not dinner, supper, would retire to his library, sit in a large wingback chair, smoking a pipe, and if it were necessary to get a book, he would have that little sliding ladder, and he'd climb up and grab the book. That wasn't me. I was the kid who grew up in a house with no books. But one day, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Austin, and I thought, what if I could write the story I was telling in that bar down the street? What if I could write that? I mean, let's just say I could, and let's just say it wasn't half bad, right? And so I did. I took out a legal pad that I had in my bag, and I wrote the story. And I knew the story. I knew it beginning, middle, end, forwards, and backwards. I'd told the story so many times it was easy to write. And it wasn't half bad. And so the next day, I wrote another one. And the day after that, I wrote 2 more. And then I was writing at midnight, and then I was writing at 4:30 in the morning. I was writing in airports and on planes and in hotel rooms. I was writing everywhere. And then it came to me that this might be what I wanted to do. Understand, there was nothing wrong with the career I had in advertising. I was doing quite well. But this felt like I had tapped into something, and I wasn't sure what it was. I was afraid. Where it might lead me. And I talked to my father about it. He said, "Mira, mijo, it's okay to be scared. Everybody gets scared. Who doesn't get scared? But if you have more faith than you have fear, you're going to be okay." This faith, like any faith, was a belief in something that wasn't altogether there, that was sensed but not always clear to see. It was a faith in what I had learned at home listening to my tíos. A faith in the depth and richness and authenticity of my tíos' stories and the profound ways they had filled in the many gaps from my not reading books. A faith I had a story to tell, and that all my life I had been preparing for this one moment. And so I quit. I stayed home, and I tried to write. And I won't tell you that it wasn't scary, so I went into a bit of a paralysis initially, but I got through it. And I kept writing, and I kept writing. And 2 years later, I did go away to graduate school at the University of Iowa. I'll also mention that I was accepted at Cornell. And I only mention that because, as it turns out, I was Ivy League material. It just took a while. You know? I finished school in 2001. In 2002, I flew to New York, met with publishers, and eventually signed a 2-book deal with Little Brown and Company. In 2003, my first book, a collection of stories titled Brownsville, came out. In 2004, UT Austin offered me a full-time position in the English department and the Center for Mexican American Studies. I had, in the short span of 7 years, radically transformed my life. One that I had sensed, but still hadn't shown itself in the first 33 years of my life. I now teach fiction workshops, as well as 2 seminars I developed. The first is called Writing Border Narratives, which is a personal essay workshop designed for students who have some connection to the border region. The second, titled A Sense of Race, deals with how various writers have presented race in their stories, novels, poems, and films. Much of what I learned on my journey, I now use in the classroom. I learned in a very real and personal way to search for the gifts students may have that aren't always evident at first glance. The students who haven't had the advantages of tutors, of attending private schools, of growing up in a house with books. I learned to encourage students to develop their own voice, that these voices are coming from someplace authentic and that they need to be heard. I learned to give students the opportunity to bring all of themselves into the classroom, their culture, their race, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their immigration status, their status as first-generation students, that claiming who they are is part of the journey. For me and for my students, this journey can be summed up with a short paragraph that appears toward the end of my most recent novel. It reads, "Where they came from is nothing more than that, where they came from. It isn't where the story ends, only where it begins." Thank you.